Sup everybody, this is Karak with ACG, and as always it's my continuing mission to bring you reviews that aren't 2 minutes long or filled with sponsored bullcrap. It really is a great time to me. One of my favorites. As the fall gets closer, we have this little ebb in the major releases, and I always love to cover the smaller games, the lesser known titles, and one of them is Gene Rain, a game out for the PS4 that releases on Steam and Xbox One on the 24th. Now, Gene Rain is a shooter in the Gears of War vein, which means popping and stopping, running and gunning, and of course, a little bit of shooting and scooting across a world where something happened and you have to, do something about it. Sounds awesome? Well, let's see if it is. Also, stay tuned to the channel this week for No Man's Sky Next and Banner Saga coverage as well. So let's get to it. As always, if you like the video, maybe subscribe. So here's my review for Gene Rain. The excellence of Fiverr translation services, someone attacking someone else because of something, and photo mode in real time. Graphics are up first. Each game, I think, offers a little surprise whenever you get it. You never know until you sit down to review it what you're getting into, and sometimes that's amazing, and sometimes it's not, and sometimes it's Gene Rain. And I mean, yeah, it works, and that's good. It never crashed, which is another positive, I guess, but this is a game with so few good points graphically that one of the only things I can mention in a positive light is the fact that some of the lighting looks interesting. That is, of course, until you notice all the graphical errors, like the self-lighting Duracell boobs that one of the main characters has, throwing off a ton of light from her right armpit like she put a friggin' floodlight in a chokehold with no reason whatsoever for it to even be there. But hey, you know what? You can shoot, and I admit the bullet ricochet patterns do look pretty good when they burst off some of the rocks, even after you notice that they're only 2D and have no real depth. And some of the lighting in particular locations, like a small set of slums you explore in the middle of the game, are at least tangentially atmospheric. But Gene Rain gets off on the wrong foot almost instantly and never really dances back into the graphical good graces afterwards. What do I mean by that? Well, first let's look at the levels. They're woefully and almost wonderfully constructed of the blandest locations ever, where pillars from ancient buildings that don't have any right to actually be in a street courtyard are just flopped down onto the ground in a desire to make sure you know you can hide behind them. Or the aforementioned slums, which happen to be sucked clean of absolutely everything, including debris, people, and hope. It's like the worst step above an asset flip on a Steam game, even though it probably could be an asset flip as well. I guess you could say some of the enemies did look okay, with thunderous, massive, armored chain gun wielding robots side to side with smaller, more graceful robots, neither of which really animate that well or half the time look like they actually exist in the same level as your main character. This, interestingly enough, does change up when you face a particular boss and main series of enemies, in all honesty, that look good enough, or at the very least passable enough, that he doesn't even look like he sort of belongs in the game, as he spins around and dashes across the level and attacks you with his futuristic samurai sword with this digital rendition of dark, bloody cherry blossom leaves flitting behind him. That's not bad at all. But to me, it's that unevenness that abounds here, and it gets worse. The texture work astounds me. It's simply terrible. It's at the very most mid PS3. Half of it looks like it's been layered in a fine coating of grease and then defocused by a $9 webcam. It's insane. It has massive pixelation rampant throughout all of it and just looks bad. When you sit down and look at it, almost nothing about Gene Rain looks remotely good, even though they have this cool little baby Magneto character that runs around for a couple moments. But those cutscenes are barely passable, dropping to frame rates in the low teens. Of course, just like being in our teens, it's all about performance. How does this game perform? Well, they have a high-resolution mode in this. Let's check it out right now. Yeah, that's the difference between the two. So basically, you have a normal mode and a game mode that doesn't really run at all. The game just very often doesn't fit its frame rate, and when you turn on the high-resolution mode, well, it doesn't hit any kind of frame rate. And if you think I'm exaggerating, I'm just going to leave this handgun model that's been enlarged so they can pretend it's a rifle right here for you, next to a picture of someone getting a hug. It is simply, stunningly awful. Sound, music, and voice.
All curses come true. They have no feelings like dried bone beneath the ground.
What happened to them? Where are you? I know this place. This is where I installed my mechanical heart. Before you command me, you better to make things clear.
The executor uses the same heart with you.
Tower? Shouldn't they protect such thing? Why?
And let's do sound first. It's terrible. I want to make sure this is clear. This is the worst mixture I've ever heard in a sound. This is like the sound engineer has a fucking vendetta against ears. Like he woke up and said, you know what, I hate ears, and then set out his sights on doing as much goddamn damage to them as possible in the quickest time frame. For example, 1 second voices are almost inaudible. Then Grandma Warbucks thunder chants herself into a cutscene like a friggin' Apache helicopter starts up next to your head, and then keeps talking as the ambient sounds in the room all rush up to the same space to see if they can possibly inhabit all of the same location in the sound spectrum and basically drown her out. How are the guns, you may ask? Well, they're horrendous, with only one that sounds even remotely passable, apparently trying to imitate the world's angriest popcorn popper. Explosions are just sound that plays out, and at first it sounds sort of like an explosion, but I am telling you, it then climbs up into this clipped sound stage and this strange crescendo of white noise. Terrible. But the best just has to be the footsteps. They really have to go out and try to make something this bad. It's not even canned footsteps from an asset store, which would be better. It's like someone just rhythmically saying toke, 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 and recording that and shrugging and feeling happy with themselves. Or the fact that many animations that the characters have either have no sound whatsoever or, like the switching weapon sounds, attempts to play at times when other times it doesn't play at all. As a package, woeful. And of course that brings us to music. And they actually do something smart here with the music. They don't almost have any, and I gotta say that's actually pretty good because the little bits that they do have are generic try-hard Hans Zimmer moments that sound like someone once heard a song he did for a movie and tried to recreate it by crashing a car into a fucking music store while recording it. It's just terrible. Luckily, what little is there plays very rarely, which, yes, leaves you at the mercy of the lackluster sound effects I already talked about, but honestly, maybe that's better. Voice. This is actually awesome. It's not at all. It's terrible. I legitimately don't even know what they're saying half the time. I've played the game for hours and I still don't know what they're saying. I've looked around the level and I still don't know what they're saying. And half of the time, a game like this, if you have a problem with bad dubs, you can go to subs or vice versa. But here, you absolutely can't. Voices are all recorded at completely different audio levels. And worse yet, a number of them are heavily clipping, resulting in everything sounding like the developers thought was a voiceover. Voices don't have to be perfect. We've lived with generations of games where only text was used to impart emotion. Sadly, the text here is like Google Translate. If Google Translate was that one kid who watched Indiana Jones more than once and magically pretended he knew German from the Nazis. It is without a doubt the worst voice I've ever heard in a game. And speaking of games, that brings us to gameplay and a bit about the story. Or it would if it made any goddamn sense at all. The game starts out with some weird story about differing factions and then someone literally yells, "God damn you, Bill Feynman," like you're really supposed to understand who that is or why he matters, but most likely you're not gonna. It is incomprehensible. It's the opposite end of making sense, and the game doesn't help itself much at all by leaping headlong into other characters, a total of 3, without any real preamble, and for a majority of the time, not really connecting the protagonists at all. But that's fine, right? If the gameplay's good, we can forgive some problems and some errors. As you play the 3 protagonists throughout the game, it tries to take that shoot and scoot of a Gears of War game, but somewhere around the letter G in that title, it fails, which results in Ears of War, which would be a resounding success if they had just named the game based on the audio pounding that you're going to get from the title. You run around, you gather ammo for your weapons and shoot enemies, and sometimes you grab a special weapon in particular parts of a level. Now those weapons can be upgraded, but never actually need to be, and each of the characters has a special skill like slow motion and a shield, which also don't need to ever be used. You may think, this is just too much, it cannot get worse, but yes, it actually can. The AI is a goddamn love letter to the word terrible. For example, the friendly AI. All the time, the dude just shoots you, and not a little bit. I mean, he aptly puts a Colonial Marines misspelled AI command version to shame, and if he doesn't run away from battle, he's running directly towards it, then back, then towards, then back, then towards, then back, then towards, and randomly fires off a couple warning shots into your face, then sprints off again. As I continued to play it, I wasn't 100% sure he wasn't on the bad guy's side. Enemies fare no better either, with many of them doing particular attack routines regardless if you're actually visible. So that means an enemy might shamble right, fire, shamble left, fire. But they don't really ever check if you're there. About the only thing that sometimes they do well, and not always well actually, is the use of cover around them. But their sheer unmitigated surprise as you leap over the giant pillar they're hiding behind tells me that they didn't realize people could jump in this game. How does all this come together? How does the control work? It simply doesn't. Go behind cover and you have no clue if the game is going to allow you to reload or if you're going to come out of cover to do it and then have to jump back in. You have 3 options for looking sensitivity, with only 2 of them actually saving their settings all the time and the other just randomly going back to default in the middle of battle. This might all sound bad, but one thing Gene Rain does incredibly well, really nails it perfectly, is it's only a few hours long, and I can't remember the last time I felt this much satisfaction at a game when it was over and leaping to turn off the console. Fun factor. The nice thing is when we are in these slower times of the years, as the games industry ramps up for that next month, and there's always these amazing little titles to check out, of course, you never actually understand what they're going to be like until you turn them on. And sometimes that results in a fresh little title like Pool Panic, and other times it results in playing this. I'm not saying this is as bad as Alekine's Gun. I'm just saying if Alekine's Gun had a younger brother whose parents drank a lot when he was in the womb, this would probably be that game. This is one of the first games I'm really surprised that the console didn't sympathetically shut down to stop me from playing it. It is not fun. The controls terrible, the options poor, the gameplay rote, the locations bland, the graphics lackluster, the characters, well, they might be cool if I could understand what babies said when they sit in the corner and coo at one another, but I can't, so technically, they suck too. As you guys know, I rate games on a buy, wait for sale, rent, or never touch rating system, with rent replacing deep sale on PC titles. This is absolutely never touch. If this game had a premium edition, it wouldn't be the game. It'd be a statue of a giant middle finger and a 4-page apology letter to players. It is terrible. There is nothing redeemable about the game. In fact, if mod players put this together to show what they could do, most people would say, man, you need to do a lot more. So anyway, that's it for me. I hope you guys liked the video. If you did, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't, give it a thumbs down. Maybe check out Patreon or Twitter. Patreon is, of course, the place where you can become a patron for the channel, win games, jump into the Discord. One of the greatest communities that I've ever seen on the internet is in that Discord. Absolutely. Thank you to them for always keeping it up, keeping it real, and keeping it fun to discuss. Peace out and enjoy the rest of your week.